Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Assalamualaikum, Jiayanu, Bakhair Agale, Ni hao, Chunushumme, Washmale, Ohio Gonzaimas, Guten Morgen, Ola, Boyor, Privyet, Kaifahal, Haleshuma Chatore, Ahlan Wasal, Marhaba, Buna, Mucho, Gracias, Swabio, Balli Kere, Hosh Galden, Anayo Sayo, Huyamora, Adab, and thank you very much, everybody, for tuning into PTV World. You're certainly watching World this morning. Alongside my very well-learned colleague who happens to be Miss Haja Sati. I happen to be Shahzad Hasan Khan, and we hope and pray that on a fine, cold Tuesday morning, everybody out there is doing wonderfully well, that you're ready to kickstart your day with us. But first things first, hello Haja, how are you doing today?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for introducing me, Shahzad. So certainly you don't sound very well because I do feel that there's some congestion out there. And obviously it's very dry, it's cold, and we've seen the effects of climate change everywhere around the world, and especially with the smog here engulfing the entire Islamabad, which was not a very prominent feature when we were growing up, especially in Islamabad, right? True. We used to breathe in a cleaner airs, but now airs are getting the sky is getting very dark and dry and dirty. And I think this is the time we need to rethink our approach towards the climate change, towards our lifestyles, and towards how we want our younger generation or the next generation to live, certainly. Because
exactly. But Haja, you know what, in addition to that, there's one more thing which I would certainly want to kind of pinpoint over here. I think that people actually lack the very basic ethics as well. I mean, imagine if you unfortunately are going through flu. I think what you really need to make sure is that, you know, do not shake hands with people, because you can transfer it to other people. And over here, you know, they've been avoiding this culture, and I've seen that even amidst COVID. So imagine that, you know, people who might have figured out that they might have been going through COVID and they really didn't get themselves tested. They were like, oh, nahi, Jani, kuch nahi hota, Jani. You know, why have this casual approach when, God forbid, it can actually cost somebody's life? I think that's something we really need to talk about, that these basic ethics really need to be inculcated within our own society. If you have flu, wear a mask, make sure that you're not going to shake hands or give japia to somebody else as well. Please don't do that. You know, you're going to make other people ill. And that's how exactly I got ill as well. You know, so I was maintaining my distance. I don't know, man. I think I should have refused myself.
Certainly when you are especially sitting in a gathering and you're interacting with people, it's very difficult to avoid, and you very rightly pinpointed out that people need to be more ethical about it. They need to be more cognizant about the fact that you can transmit this flu. And as we are, I mean, as the years of the lives go on, I do feel this influenza or flu thing, it is getting potent and stronger, and it's mutating, because I do remember that when I used to get ill, it was just 3 or 4 days, but now it's like 10 days of illness, and that's making you really weak out there. And there's some people who do not even have that much of ethics that they would actually cough on your face, right?
True.
And it's very irritating. It's really bad. It does not fit the ethical standards out there, medically, culturally, whatever, right? So make sure that you are cognizant about this fact. And especially it's very dry, so these influenza are very stronger, and especially it's very potent in the closed spaces, right?
Exactly. So, and Haja, since you've spoken about it as well, that, you know, it's getting more potent now, that's something which is debatable. So imagine that if we go back 10 years, you know, so obviously it was a 2-day or a 3-day affair, and then, you know, you were over flu. I think it might be our age as well that we have aged.
We certainly do not want to talk about it, so let's move on to our top story.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has reaffirmed his government's commitment for the rehabilitation and reconstruction in the flood-affected areas of the country, including DI Khan and Tang. Addressing a ceremony in DI Khan, he said government has distributed 90 billion rupees among the flood-hit people and provided them relief items. He said Pakistan has been badly affected by the climate change despite its negligible contribution in the global emissions of the carbon. He said this issue will be raised effectively at the donors conference to be held at Geneva. And certainly these are the areas, DI Khan and Tank, where our entire team went for reporting on the climate change, about the flooding, and certainly it's located in the periphery of the country, and it was badly affected by that. And I think when we talk about the climate change, it has very deep and personal tones to it, because we literally felt the effects of that. We literally saw the destruction, and we have seen how many problems and new problems this whole thing will create in the future.
Exactly. So, and in addition to that, moving on, you know, this day unfortunately brings back a lot of unfortunate memories to my mind. I was still a young university student, preparing for my sessionals. So I was having my sessionals, we were preparing, and all of a sudden this news came out where, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan lost its outstanding leader and icon of democracy in the world when the anti-democratic demons assassinated the Muhtarama Benazir Bhutto Shaheed on December 27th in 2007. But she lives on in minds and hearts of the people of her country, and that's true.
And certainly, Shahzad, especially if you go abroad in the Western world, now there's a lot of awareness because of the social media, but I think Benazir was one such iconic figure that everyone knew. Because of her, everyone knew where Pakistan is located.
True.
Because I do feel certainly the people in the West, they're not as politically aware as we are in the third world countries. And I read her book, Daughter of the East. It is a wonderful book. If you ask me for book recommendations, the Benazir Bhutto's book comes first, and then comes the Nelson Mandela, because she has documented her entire journey, her entire political struggle. That was never violent. It was all led by a woman to reform her country, how she was imprisoned, and then she came out so much stronger. And the sort of people that she used to attract, I mean, she was, I would say she was a lioness, and whenever she would go on to the rallies, and especially she was campaigning for the elections, and she was expecting at that time, and you would see the sea of people would emerge, especially on that train, welcoming the leader, welcoming their hero, the Muhtarama Benazir Bhutto, iconic fighter for the democracy. And there's one quote that I loved, and I think I've used it multiple times in my essays when I was a student. It's about the democracy. She says that democracy is the sound of the clash of the ideas. So how beautifully she encapsulated the concept of democracy. And not just that, back then when she was a student at the Oxford University, I think she was the first Pakistani who was elected, female Pakistani, female South Asian, female non-Western, who was elected as a head of the student body out there. And obviously,
and Haja, even in addition to that, I would certainly want to mention over here how she was the first ever Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic, female Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and even in the world for an Islamic country.
And America has yet to elect a first female Prime Minister, President.
Exactly. And in addition to that, I think that Muhtarama always spoke about people, for the people, by the people. I think that was their ideology. And even now, I think that Bilawal Bhutto Zardari continues to live with that legacy as well. So there's this cult out there.
A lot of physical feature of his mother. So there is this emotional connection which a lot of people can connect with that, and especially when she was getting married there. So you have lived in the Karachi, and you will be more aware with the area of Liari there, and Liari has a lot of People's Party supporter out there. And she was dressed in a very simple dress, and she was wearing those what do you call, kanch ki churiyan, or the bangles, and she really wanted to rethink our approach towards a wedding where we are loaded, and this dowry is such a big problem. So she wanted to break this taboo out there. I think we remember that. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. And we hope and pray that her soul rest in peace in heavens above.
And still patience for the bereaved as well. And we all, ladies and gentlemen, as Pakistanis are bereaved. When we kind of talk about, when we speak about Muhtarama Benazir Bhutto Sahiba, I think she's that epitome of success in the first place, and then looking at her political career, I think that there's nobody who's going to come closer to that.
And I do feel that it's a very heavy task, especially for the women in the politics, because the first thing that a lot of people, especially in this patriarchal structure, do is that they character assassinate there. And certainly she went through that, but she fought off so bravely. She dominated all her odds, and she emerged as one of the brilliant leaders of the South Asia.
And Haja, in addition to that, imagine that her husband back in those days was in jail. Not just that, she was looking after her kids, so there are multiple interviews where kids would always be around her, and then the family itself was going through a very bigger tragedy when we speak about her brothers as well. So, to kind of emerge from all of those challenges and become such an epitome of success in her political career and the way people shared love, I think it's going to be an example even for the coming generations as well. But now moving on to where how, ladies and gentlemen, weather these days is an example, God forbid people give, that, you know, if you are traveling, make sure that you avoid traveling. You really need to prepare yourself, because God forbid, you know, it is very prone to accidents when we speak about the weather away in Pakistan. So Lahore and its surrounding areas have been hit by a severe cold wave and dense fog. To know more, let's watch the following report by our Lahore reporter, Mr. Ali Danish.
So certainly, Shahzad, there is a thick fog which has badly affected the flow of the road and the air traffic in several cities of Punjab, including Lahore and Multan. And this fog has paralyzed the routine life in Lahore. The flight operation at the Allama Iqbal International Airport, Lahore and Multan Airport was also affected due to a severe weather condition, and several incoming flights were diverted to other airports, while outgoing flights were either delayed or cancelled. Dense fog has also disrupted traffic at several places in the province at the national highway due to low visibility. And obviously we can see the adverse effects of the climate. It's not just the Pakistan. Yesterday we also reported it's in America too. I was listening to the reports yesterday, and according to the yesterday's reports, 59 people have died because of the weather related incidents in the US, because there's the Arctic storm going out there.
And it has affected Canada as well, you know, so and Japan as well, you know, so we really need to be kind of very conclusive of the fact that, you know, that climate change is real. And I think to some extent, I shouldn't be saying that. It's not a very softer thing to say. Rather, it's a little harsh, but it was US in the first place where the then President Trump really did not kind of comply to what the protocol said of the climate change and to avoid that. And they still wanted more industry to grow. And unfortunately, they've been contributing. They've been the major contributor to the climate change.
So, Shahzad, very well you mentioned about that, because they pull out of that climate change treaty. But again, climate change presents us the opportunity to cooperate globally, because this is one of the defining features of the globalization, is that this world is entire global village out there. People are interacting. There's a free flow of ideas, people, communication and whatnot. So, in order to have more elaborate conversation regarding the globalization and how to protect our cultural values in the midst of the globalization, because globalization means that the American culture, Western culture is spreading in the entire world, but the people, our local communities out there, they are particular about their own culture too.
But I have a very different definition to globalization. I think globalization is that you have your far reach out there, you know, you can reach out to anybody, you know, on this planet Earth. Probably you might be sending signals to any other planet too as well, but you know, taking inspiration from their culture is a very different perspective, which I don't think that I would make sure that it's going to lie under the umbrella of globalization, but the impact is going to be there. But we have smarter children over here. We would want them to kind of let us know whether their research which they did on media globalization, what does it tell them, you know, how do we curtail to our values, you know, the ethos. So we certainly would want to, you know, kind of introduce these amazing people over here, amazing kids, you know, the future of Pakistan, to kind of speak about it. So let's see what the newer generation of Pakistan thinks about media globalization.
So first of all, we have Saida Fatma Salman. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting us to your show.
Thank you so much for coming.
I would like to start by firstly saying
but
that.
Before you start, you know, I would certainly want you to kind of, you know, just stay where you are and let us introduce your amazing friends as well, and then we'll come back to you, okay?
Right. So joining Fatma, we have Aida Jodad. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Joining Aida is Momina Wasif. Assalamu alaikum, Momina, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
So, you know, whenever, you know, when it was my first time on television, you know, I certainly went through what you guys are going through as well. But certainly next 2 minutes you will feel more relaxed, and we certainly want you to say what you've done, you know, so we're not going to ask you anything out of syllabus or out of the box as well. So let's talk about where you were, you started with, you know, what media globalization is for you guys and what sort of research you put in. So tell us about this project first of all, and then we'll move on what you think about media globalization.
Fizza.
I would just like to say firstly that my name is actually Fizza Fatma. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically what we're doing is we selected as global perspective as our elective subject in our school. So a component of this subject is the team project. We came together as a team and formulated a research question on the topic tradition, culture and identity, as we feel that due to media globalization, many people nowadays are drifting away from their culture.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. True, that's true.
Yes.
Why do you think they're drifting away? You know, that's what the research is about, no, right?
Yeah.
So because, my debate over here today, my argument over here today is that, just because for me globalization is reaching out to whoever you want to reach out to. But I don't think that, until and unless you really want to adopt somebody else's culture, that it can have an impact on you. So what does your research say? Why do you think we are drifting away from our culture?
Basically, we're not saying that a person can fully be influenced. We're saying that media outlets nowadays are more ensuring westernized content, westernized culture. And due to this influence, by constantly looking again and again at westernized culture, people are adapting it nowadays. For example, let me give you an example. For example, a student or anyone, let's say, walks through a pile of coal. Their clothes will obviously start to smell like coal. And let's say if another person walks through a pile of a shop with perfume, their clothes will start to smell like perfume. So obviously when you are exposed to certain aspects, you start to adopt them. So when you're exposed to westernized culture, basically your own perceptions start to become more inclined towards them.
Alright, so which is why I'm going to take a point over here. I'm very sorry, Hajra, but I think that we're building up this argument. So all of you were a part of this project, right? So I'm not going to throw every question towards Fiza as well. So I'm going to move on to you, Aida. So now, Aida, what happens is that I would want you to give us examples from Pakistan media houses where, because your very dear colleague and friend and student has actually mentioned over here that the media outlets are actually sharing a lot of Western content. Now, I haven't seen any Western content on Pakistan television. I haven't seen any Western content on any of the television channels. Rather, they're more interested in kind of talking about the political lives of
Turkish content?
Of our political heroes. Yeah, Turkish content is our content. That culture is similar to our culture. So that debate of having, getting losing your culture and then moving on to somebody else's culture. So where did you get those examples that we have shared, or the media houses over here in Pakistan have actually shared content of the Western people? Please go ahead.
Well, it's not exactly just news channels, it's more social media. And different social media platforms that
you have subscribed to, right?
Yes.
So in the first place, that's your choice of subscription, because if I am going to speak about Muru, if I'm going to speak about Irfan Janejo, if I'm going to speak about all of these vloggers who are doing fabulous jobs out there, I haven't seen them promoting Western or any other sort of content. Rather, they have been traveling, they've been talking about places you can go visit, be with your partner, do whatever. But I've never seen that, that they've westernized their content. So where did you bring that from?
If I could add something. I would just like to say that our focus is more on media globalization. On global media, we're not specifically talking
Pakistan,
about news
right?
channels. On Pakistan or news channels especially.
Exactly. So my argument over here is, I'm sorry, and I always like it. I always want to have this conversation with my daughters too as well. Alhamdulillah, I have 3 daughters, and I've seen that that they follow on YouTube. A lot of children who do toy reviews. All of that Western content does come in, and the way they speak, I could see that they're drifting away from the culture. But then eventually it was our responsibility to make sure what they're going to be subscribing for, right? Because when we speak about media globalization and we're not sticking to Pakistan, what we really need to keep in mind is that it was our choice in the first place that we are watching that content.
True, that is something that parents should overlook as well.
Yes.
But the thing is, if you're not talking about media outlets, right? Let's talk about movies. We can see that many movies are now inclined towards Western culture. You can see the clothing, the attire. You can see the behavior that the people experience. You can see their drinks. Many things are now more westernized. They are showing westernized content, thus people are drifting away.
Okay, so I think what these kids wanted to say is that we need to reclaim back our own cultural values out there, right? So when we are eating McDonald's, when we are eating KFC or different pizzas out there, or all of these multinational corporations, brands out there.
I've been eating anda parathas too. Nobody talks about that.
You eat at the McDonald's too, right? So obviously the culture of the globalization is there in Pakistan, and in Pakistan.
What about them having a cup of tea?
What?
They even drink a cup of tea.
They introduced the tea in subcontinent.
They like the Peshawari mutton over there too much, So I've been to these restaurants. So I think,
Peshawari mutton is not equivalent to McDonald's outreach in the world out there, right?
Obviously, so that's the shortfall of our people. It's not the shortfall of theirs. So wherever they got that facility, imagine, so for all of those diplomats we've had over here, for all of those ambassadors we've had on the shows, they would always speak about mangoes, biryani, mutton and everything.
Sajji.
But let's move on to you, Bete. So what's your take on this as well? This part of conversation we've had what sort of defense do you have for your friends?
To test our theory, we conducted surveys which showed that people are more inclined towards the Western influence, and we gave them options showing whether they prefer their locally produced stuff or Western or like Hollywood stuff, and they selected the Western
Hollywood
option.
is cooler, you know, there's this influence. You know, I watched this movie Battleship. I think it has to be one of my favorite movies as well. And right after that, I was so pumped up. I was like, you know, ye karna hai maine zindagi mein, you know. So obviously the influence is there. Please continue.
So our results show that people are more influenced by the Western media, which is why we know that people are drifting away from their cultural practices and their culture itself.
Yeah.
So and then how can we, so if you were saying that they are drifting away from the cultural practices, so how, so it's a problem, right?
Yes.
That you're problematizing this concept. So what can we do to make sure that we revert back to our cultural values? And also the thing about the culture is that it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving within our own society. So for example, what our dada, dadi, nana, nani, their cultural values were different from our parents' generation, and then our generation, and then our kids' generation will always be different than us. So obviously this reinforces the point that it's constantly evolving. So what needs to be done?
Since you just said that culture is constantly evolving, I feel that that's very important. And it is constantly evolving. That's why we want that media outlets, that's why you're here today as well. We believe that media outlets should promote cultural values and have shows and activities, and film industries should promote cultural values even more. Furthermore, that we believe that media outlets are, like many media outlets are showing cultural programs which are evolving our culture and are promoting it. But we feel that educational institutes should also promote cultural values, should engage students in activities that host and improve their culture and promote it further in their...
But either coming back to you, so when we talk about, since you're associated with the entertainment industry, Shahzad, and we've seen that Pakistani dramas are promoting a lot of cultural values out there, but there's also a lot of criticism which is coming on those dramas because they are somehow depicting very archaic concept and they do not diversify their plot lines out there. Especially when that was the case back in the golden days of PTV and the PTV dramas. So how do you see this entire situation involving and this critique on our cultural values which is depicted in our Pakistani dramas?
And in addition to that, you know, I believe that there's one more point. Now, Hajar, I think it's all about how you prioritize it. I mean, PTV is still producing the same dramas, but people are not watching it the way they used to watch it because it was, back then it was only PTV.
Right.
Now, you know what, I think it is human nature, you know, so whenever there's more masala, when there's more controversy, when there's more of these things. So imagine, because that's something we spoke about in 2022. Imagine that the people who got viral, this lady who was dancing, she got viral. You know, Lahore Da Pawa got viral. You know, so this is our priority. If that's what people are going to watch, I mean, imagine, obviously we're going to drift from that culture. But let's have this conversation, because I have a very different feeling about my culture. And that feeling is obviously those things which we have seen in our family. But, you know, for us, you know, when we got independent back in 1947, you know, I think we have the culture of this subcontinent, right? We do not have the culture of our own. And that's something which I would certainly want to speak about, because imagine that, you know, before my grandfather, you know, his father was a Sikh. And obviously that has transcended into us as well, you know, and I have no shame in it. I mean, I'm proud of it that, you know, my father could actually think that, okay, you know, Islam is a religion that we need to follow. So it's great for us.
So
but those values will vary.
Obviously, culture is obviously affected by the religion sometimes, and sometimes a lot of times, right? For example, in Pakistan, we have a lot of Islamic influence on our cultural values, right? And that's not a bad thing at all, especially, right? Because, and then we have our own indigenous cultural values that are not related to the religion, but they are in our society. So, for example, Pakistani culture is different than the Turkish culture. Even though the Turkish is also, there are also Muslims out there, right?
True.
Right? So I would want to ask my worthy guest here is that how do you see we can, I mean, how can we promote our cultural values? Because we have already seen that there are dramas out there who are doing that, but we do feel sometimes that they're not doing that much of a good job. So what other channels can we utilize?
We should use the problem itself, which is media, to promote the cultural values and to preserve cultural identity perceptions.
Right.
Our school celebrates a day on 23rd March, Cultural Day, where we promote our culture and express how stuff is done in our culture, and we sing songs, food, and displays are made. So we can use ask schools to promote more cultural values by holding such activities.
I think it's wonderful, and the schools really need to kind of introduce a subject, where we are concentrating on what our culture is all about, who were the flag bearers of our culture, what were the values.
I think social studies already does that.
Yeah, because the values have changed now. Imagine, earlier there was a time my father used to tell me that when I used to come back home, I was not really, it was looked down upon that, if I'm going to just go and pick up my daughter in my lap and, something of that sort.
Okay.
And now when I used to go back home, so all three of them start to come running towards me. I would hug them, play with them. So he would always tell me that, hey, you know what, I missed my time with my daughters because I couldn't do that. There was this societal pressure, cultural pressure that, what are you doing? Something mard and all of that.
Right.
Which we do not buy at all. But then he would always say to me that, Putra, this is your time, enjoy it, I've missed it and I regret it as well.
True.
So I think that's something which everybody needs to understand, that, just kind of modernizing our culture won't really help us. It might have hurted a lot of people to be in that. That's very, I think it's just like being in a
obviously culture is constantly evolving and changing. This was the point.
By the culture as well, so be expressive. I think that's good.
Right.
But where we lost, how people have been vouching against hijab as well. I think people from all of those values which we have had, because my dadi would always be shy of my dada. So no matter what happened, now imagine that, they had, alhamdulillah, 70 bache niche, and then from their kids to their kids, and then they would still be very shy. I would like that. But obviously the conversation will still go on. We have other people to kind of contribute to it as well. But let us very quickly take your opinion on that. What do you think will be the solution to make sure that we stay in touch with our culture, intact, the future generations?
Okay, well, we think that parents could talk to their children about it. Parents could tell their children about cultural values and about how culture has been evolving. We could have activities with parents sitting with their grandparents and them telling them about their culture and how the culture has evolved nowadays. Yes, we could do that as well.
That's your take. Either, what about you? What's your take? What's the solution?
I think that our parents and our grandparents are the people who, like, at their time, they are the main people who know our culture, the ins and the outs of our culture.
Yeah.
And they are the people who are going to pass it down to younger generations.
So spend more time with them.
Yeah, so spend more time with them.
Wonderful solution.
What about you, Bete?
We should, like, our parents and grandparents need to make sure that traditions don't die during, like, as generations go on. Like,
for example, what traditions? Very sorry, doodh pilai. Those aren't our traditions. That's why I wanted to share it with you kids as well, because you're sitting with the elderly of your country. I'm not very elderly. We're somewhere in between. We're trying to figure out our lives ourselves. But yes, I think that, we really need to kind of tell you that, that's not our tradition, by the way. But since we belong to such families back in those days as well, so it is carried upon. I think our tradition would have been only a walima and then, some good rice and food to eat. And that's it,
what are you talking about? the grandiose weddings have always been there. These kids are so smart, you can't hold them.
That's what I'm saying now. That's what I'm saying. And even our
so
producer is saying something. So very quickly, please go ahead. So, that was my take on it. Make sure that you guys contribute as well. Do not rely on the elderly only. Do your own research.
Yes,
Make sure.
We feel that it should also come from within. We should, like, ourselves dress up in our cultural attire and start to eat that cultural food and start to, like, tell people about our culture.
Awareness
is a very important part.
We should take pride in our culture and our traditions.
Right. Instead of, feeling inferior about it. So this is not
Start
about
living in joint family system, people. You will get that culture back. People, for all of those aunties who are out there who was never in favor of living in a joint family system, please go back. This is for your kids. You'll have to do that, okay?
Okay, so we can have another debate about it. So thank you so much, kids, for coming to our show. It was a pleasure hosting you guys. So after a short break, we are going to come back and continue this discussion. So don't go anywhere.
Yeah, let's do this.
So welcome back, and when we were on the break, we were having a very vibrant discussion in the studio with the very young kids, bright, brilliant kids here, and certainly they contributed a lot to this conversation regarding our culture, Pakistani culture, what constitutes Pakistani culture, because I do feel whenever I see Rooh Afza, I can associate it with Pakistani culture, because this is a beverage that was produced in the Pakistan.
Or Jame Shiri.
Jame Shiri, of course.
Or quiz.
Or the arke, gulab and all of this stuff,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a very integral part and an ingredient in that. So in order to have more of this conversation, quickly we would like to introduce our guest. So we have been joined by Kashmala Shakil. Assalamu alaikum Kashmala, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
Right.
you.
Joining Kashmala, we have Rehab Abbasi. Assalamu alaikum Miss Abbasi. How are you doing? And thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you once again. You know, for example, so I'm going to remind you of our culture as well. So imagine that, you know, when we were growing up, you know, we were not supposed to, you know, say anything in front of our elders.
Yes.
You know, so that was a part of our culture. But now, alhamdulillah,
It's changing.
our, you know, younger generations have bigger mouths than we do. You know, and I don't say that, you know, because that's freedom of expression. These things have changed over time, and that's how cultures do modify. But if you want to contribute to what we were talking about right before the break, you can contribute to that so that we can move on with what you think about media globalization and how it has affected our culture.
Okay, so previously you mentioned that cultures evolve over time.
True.
Yeah.
We think that it's not that cultures evolve, it's that mindsets change over time.
Yeah.
The
Right.
true essence of a culture lies in the traditions that were passed down to us from our ancestors.
Yeah.
And that is what we aim to achieve. We aim to preserve these traditions.
Yeah.
But
So
what if these traditions are not right? I mean, they do not match the pace of the time. What about
you
that?
know, that's the thing. It's not that media globalization completely has negative aspects to it. It also has positive aspects to
true.
it.
True, true.
It's giving us the freedom of speech. It's helped us recognize our rights. And that's the good part about media globalization. But what we are losing is that we're starting to question our traditions. We're not like how we once used to be. We're not wearing our traditional clothes. We conducted this survey where we observed that majority of the children our age who excessively use social media
Right.
prefer to wear Western clothes. They prefer to eat fast food. They prefer to listen to Western music rather than locally produced music.
That's likability as well, you know. But what I wanted to ask you over here is your answer is perfect, and we certainly want to kind of make sure that, you know, those traditions live with us. But what if, you know, those traditions did not bring equal opportunity for both the genders within the society? For example, I've given you my example of my dadi. You know, would never speak in front of my dada. You know, that's not a tradition I've loved throughout my life. I would like, yeah, dadi ko bolne
So-
nahi dete.
maybe-
You know, so imagine, why do we really need to keep that tradition intact rather than modify it where both of them can speak equally?
I think that's more of a cultural norm. I think that's more of a way of thinking than a tradition. Traditions would be our celebrations, or let's say Chandrat. These are traditions. That is how people used to think. With time, how we think, how our mindset changes, it's changed for our parents, and it's completely different
Exactly.
for us.
So earlier, you know, you spoke about Chandrat. You know, earlier, you know, for example, if my dadi wanted to get henna, a woman would come to our house, you know, give her henna. Now all of you go out to get henna. So how do you think that tradition has changed?
I celebrate Eid in my village, Swat,
Wonderful.
and the ladies, they do come to our house
Yeah.
to...
So that's still intact.
Yes, that's intact for me. I cannot
Yeah.
speak for others, but I think people are losing this tradition
And
over
should
time.
should we do that, or what's your take, or we should?
I think we should keep in touch with this tradition. It's a beautiful tradition.
Let's see what Rehab has to say.
I like to agree with Kashmala.
Just because she's
not-
your friend?
No,
All right.
I'd like to say that it's not traditions that evolve; it's our mindset. So,
Yeah.
as she said, it's our traditions that we need to take pride in them, and we need to.
But certainly when your mindset evolves, that also have a bearing on your evolution of the culture, right? Yeah.
It's directly correlated, yeah.
Yes, it's directly correlated. But I do get your point, because you are mentioning that we should not feel inferior about our culture. We should celebrate that. We should take a lot of ownership of that, right? This is your main point across that, right? You wanted to add something
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it to the conversation?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, just like Kashmala said and Rahab said, that mindsets are evolving during time. So I feel that, just like I mentioned in the last segment as well, that people should talk to their children and talk to their family about how their mindset has evolved and
Right.
how our cultures are changing. So yeah, we should.
No, but you know, it's not one man's call. You know, so imagine that my daughter, alhamdulillah, the eldest one is now going to be 10 inshallah next year. And I was telling her that all our lives our parents have always spoken with us that in Punjabi. Ki haal hai, kithe ja rahe hain, ki kar rahe hain, all of that. And now, so imagine whenever I try to speak Punjabi with my daughter, my wife does not like it at all. Oh, what are you doing? So how do we make sure that that all of those values are going to be there? Imagine, God forbid, because what I'm seeing from here is that if a lot of urbanization is going to take place, people are going to move from rural areas to urbanized cities. Imagine they would forget their language, they would forget all of what we have been transcended with, all sorts of values, culture, norms, ethos, and where will we be? And it scares me at times, so I try. Beta, please make sure, okay, you say something in Punjabi. So the only thing she remembers is "Thoda ki haal hai." That's it. I'm fit. So how do we do it? So we would want you people, because you are the future generations, to make sure that you keep that language alive, because we have 71 or more languages over here in Pakistan. How do we do that now? So towards the end, let's talk about that.
I think that schools can contribute to this, because I remember when we were younger, our teachers would encourage us to speak in English. They're of the completely opposite view now. They encourage us to speak in our cultural languages. They tell our parents to speak with us with our cultural languages.
Wonderful.
Because we can learn English in schools, we can learn English by reading books. We are learning other languages, but we're getting detached from our own cultural language. So I think if schools encourage it, and if our parents, they feel proud to talk to us, communicate with us in our cultural language, then I think we will be able to preserve this.
Sanjay ji ne khairam barabar.
Ji khairam.
Dore okhre. Ji. Moske.
हाँ वो miss
गए. तुम सब कुदर झुल्ले हो.
She's not Punjabi.
I think that's what the language is, if I'm not mistaken. What's your regional language?
I'm from Kashmir, so we call it Pahari.
Pahari? Okay, so let's give us something from your language as well.
That's how I don't know how to speak Pahari.
See, that's what I'm saying. You guys are responsible now. You guys have to learn it. Make sure that you put in that effort, because otherwise we might just lose our track.
See, but that's
where are you from?
I am actually, my parents migrated, so I am Urdu speaking.
Urdu speaking? हाँ जी, उर्दू में भी हो जाए जी कुछ.
अभी तो सब उर्दू में बात कर रहे हैं.
अभी सब उर्दू में बात कर रहे हैं, बेहतरीन. So that's, I think, even if our show is in English, we would certainly need to give that space to each and every language which exists out there.
And I would also like to add that when we are speaking in Urdu, certain words of English also start to appear. So that shows exactly how much we are influenced.
Yeah, that's true. For example?
For example, अगर मैं अभी उर्दू में बात करूँ, if I were to say influence, मुझे I don't know what influence is called in Urdu.
but she has a point that the Urdu is not evolving as fastly with the passage of time, and especially considering the fact that it's a very fastly changing word.
No, but there's a reason now. There's a reason.
Because we don't speak enough now.
No, the sole reason is because we do not read a lot. So imagine if I have to say something in Urdu, I would certainly make sure that I rather say it in Urdu complete, or rather speak in English complete as well. कि मैं ये बात मैं वसूख के साथ कह सकता हूँ कि अगर हम खुद पढ़ाई करना शुरू कर दें तो इसका असर हम पर जरूर होगा. I think that's how it needs to be. But we are so inclined towards reading Harry Potter and all of these stories out there. So what we do is that we do make mistakes. But ladies and gentlemen, the nations who realize their mistakes can actually kind of build up on it. And this was a beautiful research which you have done, because it brought out so much of conversation. We went out in 46 different countries. We spoke about it, how it has had an impact. We might not be right, but we have taken that initiative. You guys have taken that initiative. So a big round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to have you over here. And the credit goes to your school who pushed you to do that, where you realize that we are drifting away from our culture, our language and our values.
Thank you so much for coming to our show, and thank you so much for reclaiming back our cultural roots and for having this conversation. And I'm really glad that the kids of such a younger age are particularly cognizant about this issue. And Shehzad very lightly mentioned that we do not often read Urdu enough, and that is why we haven't produced Ghalib or Iqbal. It has been such a long time that we had such a great literary figures now.
For example, just in today's time, I would want you to read Shahir Ilahi. Just go ahead, read him, look for him. And you would know that there are people out there who's actually still doing it.
And definitely give us a feedback if you read him. How did you find him and how did you find his writing? So until next time, it's a goodbye and good morning.
Thank you. Love this.
Thank you.